Sylvers foo-up deaths that made fans cry. Fame can look like salvation until it starts taking pieces of the people inside it. One hit record, one bad contract, one childhood traded for applause, and suddenly, the dream that was supposed to save a family becomes the shadow that follows them forever. To America, the Sylvers looked perfect. Bright afros, smooth harmonies, flashing smiles, and songs that made dance floors explode. But behind the glitter lived pressure, silence, illness, regret, and wounds the industry never wanted fans to see. Today on Black Hollywood Uncut, we're pulling back the curtain on the Sylvers family and the heartbreak behind their brightest years. Stay until the very last second, subscribe, and hit the bell, because the final stories reveal how fame can turn blood into tragedy. Leon Frank Sylvers III, 73. Age. Now, Leon Frank Sylvers III was more than just another member of the Sylvers. He was one of the creative engines behind the family's sound, the young musician whose instincts helped turn a group of siblings into one of the most memorable black family acts of the 1970s. While the public saw the matching outfits, the bright afros, and the smooth choreography, Leon was often standing near the center of the music itself, shaping the rhythm that carried them forward. The Sylvers rose during a period when soul, funk, and disco were changing the sound of America. Their records were joyful on the surface, filled with movement, youth, and radio-friendly hooks. Songs like Boogie Fever and Hotline made the family feel unstoppable, as if they had been built for the stage from birth. But behind that polished image was pressure. The pressure of growing up in public, performing as a family business, and trying to survive inside an industry that often took far more than it gave. For Leon, that pressure carried a different weight. He was not only a performer, he was a builder. As the group's success began to fade and the family's direction became harder to control, Leon had to face the painful truth that talent alone could not protect them from bad contracts, changing tastes, and the emotional cost of fame. The dream that once felt like freedom slowly became a test of endurance. But Leon's story did not end in the ruins of the Sylvers' decline. He became one of the rare figures who found a second life behind the scenes. As a songwriter, producer, and arranger, he helped shape the sound of R&B beyond his own family's name, working with acts like Shalimar and Dynasty, and helping define the polished, groove-driven style of the late 1970s and 1980s. That is what makes Leon Sylvers III so important to this story. He represents both the glory and the survival. He saw the bright lights of family fame, the cracks underneath it, and the painful aftermath when the spotlight moved on. Yet he kept creating. At 73, Leon stands as proof that even when a family dream falls apart, the music can still find a way to live. Foster Emerson Sylvers, die, age 64 in 2026. Foster Emerson Sylvers was the child star whose voice once made the Sylvers feel like the future. Before the family became widely known for Boogie Fever and their polished disco-era image, Foster had already stepped into the spotlight with Misdemeanor, a record that showed how much charisma could live inside a young voice. He was not just another sibling in the group. He was one of the faces that made audiences believe the Sylvers family carried something rare. In the early years, Foster represented innocence, talent, and promise. He had the soft look of a child performer, but the confidence of someone born under stage lights. Fans heard him and felt joy. Producers saw potential. The industry saw a marketable young star. But that kind of attention can be dangerous, especially when childhood becomes a business before a child fully understands the cost. As the Sylvers rose through the 1970s, the family's success looked beautiful from the outside. Matching outfits, synchronized steps, bright smiles, and songs that made America dance. But behind that image was pressure. Pressure to perform, to earn, to stay relevant, and to keep the family dream alive even when the music industry began changing around them. Foster grew up inside that pressure, and like many young stars, the glow of early fame did not guarantee peace later in life. The transcript presents Foster's later years in a dark and dramatic way, tying his name to addiction, legal trouble, and public decline. Some of those specific scenes should be treated carefully, because they are written more like cinematic tragedy than confirmed record. What can be said with respect is that Foster's story became one of lost promise, private struggle, and the painful distance between child fame and adult reality. Foster Sylvers died in 2026 at the age of 64 after a battle with cancer. His passing reminded longtime fans that the bright voice behind Misdemeanor had belonged to a real person, not just a memory from vinyl records and television clips. His legacy is bittersweet. Foster gave the world music full of youth and rhythm, but his life also reflects the burden carried by children turned into stars too soon. Edmund Theodore Sylvers, die age 47, in 2004. Edmund Theodore Sylvers was one of the strongest voices inside the Sylvers, a performer whose presence helped push the family from talented siblings into a real force in 1970s soul and pop. When the group's music filled radio stations and dance floors, Edmund stood near the heart of that sound. His voice carried warmth, youth, and confidence, the kind of energy that made the Sylvers feel both polished and alive. The family's success looked effortless to fans. They saw the afros, the bright clothes, the synchronized movement, and the joy of songs like Boogie Fever and Hotline. But beneath the shine was a harder truth. The Sylvers were not just a band. They were a family, trying to survive inside an industry that could turn talent into money, then leave the artists fighting over what was left. That pressure touched every sibling in a different way, and Edmund's path became one of the most painful. After the group's peak, Edmund tried to build his own identity. His solo album, Have You Heard, was meant to show that he could stand outside the family name and still be heard. But the music business can be cruel to artists, trying to reinvent themselves. A voice that once helped power a group does not always receive the same attention alone. When the solo dream failed to bring the breakthrough he needed, Edmund's story began to carry the sadness of a man searching for a place after fame had moved on. The transcript describes his decline in highly dramatic terms, including isolation, financial struggle, and emotional collapse. Some of those details should not be repeated as confirmed fact without stronger evidence. But the broad emotional truth remains. Edmund's later life was far from the golden image many fans remembered. Edmund Sylvers died in 2004, at the age of 47 from lung cancer. His death came too early, and for many listeners, it symbolized how quickly the music industry can forget the people who once made it dance. Yet Edmund should not be remembered only through tragedy. He was a gifted singer, a vital part of the Sylvers sound, and a voice that still lives whenever those records play. His story is a reminder that behind every family hit song, there were real lives carrying real pain. Olympia Ann Olan Sylvers, 74 age. Now Olympia Ann Olan Sylvers was one of the earliest voices in the Sylvers family story, a young woman who came of age inside a household where music was not just a dream, but a mission. Before the group became known to millions as the Sylvers, the family had already been shaped by rehearsals, discipline, harmony, and the belief that their shared talent could lift them out of struggle and into history. Olan was part of the image that made the Sylvers feel so special in the 1970s. They were not a manufactured act thrown together by executives. They were siblings, connected by blood, rhythm, and a visual style that audiences could not ignore. Their afros, coordinated outfits, smooth voices, and synchronized stage presence made them stand out in an era when Black family groups carried both joy and representation onto national television. But behind the glow of that image was a more complicated reality. Growing up in a performing family meant that private life and public expectation were constantly colliding. Every smile had to be ready for the stage. Every performance carried the weight of the family name, and for the older siblings, that pressure could become especially heavy because they were expected to help hold the dream together, even as the industry around them became harder to trust. The transcript gives Olan a deeply tragic storyline, including claims of trauma, addiction, and disappearance from the spotlight. Those specific scenes should be treated carefully, because they are written in a dramatic style and are not widely confirmed by reliable public records. A safer truth is that, like several members of the Sylvers, Olan eventually moved away from the front of the stage as the group's commercial power faded and the family's story became quieter. Olympia Ann Olan Sylvers is 74 years old today. Her importance should not be measured only by what happened after the spotlight dimmed. She was part of a pioneering family act that helped shape the sound and image of 1970s black pop and soul. Her story reminds us that fame often remembers the hit records, but forgets the young people behind them. Olan was not just a face in a group photo. She was part of the foundation that made the Sylvers unforgettable. Charmaine Elaine Sylvers, 72 age. Now Charmaine Elaine Sylvers was one of the key sisters in the Sylvers, a family group whose sound carried the brightness of youth and the polish of a carefully trained act. In the 1970s, when audiences saw the Sylvers on television or heard them on the radio, they were not just hearing a band. They were hearing a family trying to turn harmony into survival, identity, and possibility. Charmaine's presence helped complete that family image. The Sylvers were built on togetherness, brothers and sisters singing as one unit, moving in step, and presenting a kind of black family elegance that felt both joyful and aspirational. Their music blended soul, pop, funk, and disco at a time when America was changing fast, and their success gave fans something bright to hold on to. But family fame can be a complicated gift. The same closeness that made the Sylvers powerful also made the pressure harder to escape. Every sibling carried the weight of the group's reputation. Every missed note, failed record, or business setback was not just professional, it was personal. When the hits came, the whole family rose. When the spotlight began to fade, the whole family felt the fall. In the transcript, Charmaine is mentioned in connection with the larger tragedy surrounding the Sylvers family, including a dramatic story involving Christopher trying to reach her for help. That exact scene should be treated with caution, because the transcript includes many cinematic details that are not clearly supported by public sources. What can be said more responsibly is that Charmaine was a real member of the Sylvers, part of the group's classic lineup, and part of the family legacy that fans still remember. Charmaine Elaine Sylvers is 72 years old today. Her story is quieter than some of her brothers, but that does not make it less important. Not every legacy is built from scandal, headlines, or tragedy. Sometimes it lives in background harmonies, stage formations, family photographs, and records that still make people move decades later. Charmaine represents the often overlooked side of the Sylvers, the siblings who helped create the magic, then stepped back as the world moved on. Her contribution remains woven into the sound of a family that once made America dance. James Jonathan Sylvers, 71, age. Now, James Jonathan Sylvers was one of the steady figures inside the Sylvers, a family group whose greatest power came from unity. In the 1970s, when audiences watched them perform, the magic seemed effortless. The afros, the harmonies, the choreography, the bright smiles, and the clean arrangements made the Sylvers look like a dream built from bloodline and rhythm. But behind that polished surface, every sibling carried a different weight. James was part of the musical structure that helped the family sound complete. While some members stood out more visibly as lead voices or later became known for production, the strength of the Sylvers came from the way each brother and sister filled a space. Their music was not carried by one person alone. It was carried by the feeling that an entire family was moving in one direction, chasing the same impossible dream. That dream reached its brightest point with records like Boogie Fever, Hotline, and High School Dance. For a moment, the Sylvers seemed to belong everywhere, on television, on radio, in teen magazines, and on dance floors across America. Their sound gave people joy during a complicated era, and James was part of that glow. But fame inside a family can become a trap when business, money, and pressure begin to enter the room. The same bond that made the Sylvers special also made every disappointment harder to survive. A failed record was not just a career setback, it was a wound inside the family. A bad contract was not just paperwork, it could change the future of every sibling attached to the name. The transcript places James among the family members who eventually drifted away from the spotlight after the group's commercial decline. That broader idea is believable, though many of the darker scenes in the transcript should be treated cautiously, because they are written in a highly dramatized style. What matters most is that James was part of a real musical legacy. James Jonathan Sylvers is 71 years old today. His story may not be the loudest in the Sylvers' history, but it is still essential. He represents the members who helped build the sound, share the burden, and carry the family name through an industry that celebrated them loudly, then moved on too quickly. Joseph Richard, Ricky, Sylvers, 67 age. Now Joseph Richard Ricky Sylvers was part of the Sylvers, at a time when the family's name still carried the shine of youth, rhythm, and promise. Known as Ricky, he belonged to a group that was more than a band. The Sylvers were a family brand, a living image of brothers and sisters singing together, dancing together, and presenting black excellence in a way that felt joyful, stylish, and unforgettable. Ricky's role helped complete the group's energy. The Sylvers did not rely only on one star. Their appeal came from the collective, layered voices, smooth movement, and the sense that every sibling was connected by something deeper than performance. On stage, that connection looked effortless. Behind the scenes, it required discipline, sacrifice, and the constant pressure to keep the family dream alive. During the height of their fame, songs like Boogie Fever turned the Sylvers into a major force in soul pop and disco. Their records made listeners dance, but their story was never as simple as the music sounded. As the industry changed and their commercial momentum slowed, the family began facing the reality that fame could vanish faster than anyone expected. The applause faded, the business grew complicated, and the siblings had to figure out who they were without the bright protection of the spotlight. The transcript gives Ricky a dark storyline involving addiction, collapse, and life after public attention. Those specific scenes should be handled carefully because they are not widely confirmed in reliable public records and appear heavily dramatized. A more responsible version is that Ricky, like several members of the family, became part of the quieter aftermath of the Sylvers' rise and decline, a chapter marked less by headlines than by distance from fame. Joseph Richard Ricky Sylvers is 67 years old today. His name belongs to a family legacy that still matters, even when individual stories are not always fully documented. He was part of a group that helped define a specific moment in Black music history, when family acts, soul harmonies, and disco rhythms carried emotional power. Ricky's story reminds us that not every important figure stands at the front of the microphone forever. Some legacies live in the group sound, in the rhythm behind the hit, and in the memory of a family that once made America dance. Angelia Marie, Angie Sylvers, 66 age. Now Angelia Marie, Angie Sylvers, was one of the younger members connected to the Sylvers, a family group whose image became part of the bright, dance-driven sound of the 1970s. To many fans, the Sylvers looked like pure joy. Brothers and sisters with shining afros, coordinated outfits, smooth harmonies, and songs that seemed built to make people move. But every face in that family photograph carried its own story. Angie belonged to the generation of Sylvers siblings, who grew up under the shadow of a family dream that had already become bigger than any one person. By the time the group reached national attention, the Sylvers name was no longer just a household name inside their own home. It was a brand, a sound, and a promise. Every member was expected to help protect that promise, even as the music business became harder, colder, and more unpredictable. Her role may not have been as heavily spotlighted as Leon's production genius, Foster's child star appeal, or Edmund's lead vocal presence, but Angie still mattered to the larger picture. Family groups depend on more than the most visible stars. They depend on layers, voices, movement, support, image, and the emotional bond that makes audiences believe what they are seeing is real. That is what made the Sylvers so powerful. They were not just performers standing side by side. They were siblings carrying the same history onto the stage. And when the spotlight began to fade, that shared history became both a comfort and a burden. The transcript places Angie among the family members who later stepped away from fame and lived a quieter life. That broader idea fits the reality of many former young entertainers, though the more dramatic claims in the transcript should be handled carefully. Angelia Marie, Angie Sylvers, is 66 years old today. Her story is not one of loud headlines or public scandal, and that matters. Not every legacy needs tragedy to be meaningful. Sometimes the quiet survivors are the ones who remind us that fame is only one chapter. Angie's contribution lives inside the Sylvers' legacy, in the harmonies, the stage image, the family energy, and the memory of a group that once gave America a rhythm it could not resist. The tragedy of the Sylvers was never just about fame fading away. It was about an era that pushed young black talent into the spotlight, then left them to carry the pressure in silence. Behind the smiles, the harmonies, and the family image were fears, wounds, and private struggles the industry rarely protected. But pain was never the whole story. The Sylvers gave R&B, soul, funk, and disco, a sound that still moves through generations. While some chapters ended in illness, heartbreak, and unanswered questions, their music remains bright, alive, and untouchable, a reminder that genius can survive, even when fame turns cruel. So tell us, which Sylvers story broke your heart the most, and which song still brings their legacy back to life for you? Drop your thoughts below, like this video, subscribe to Hollywood Uncut, and hit the notification bell for more unvarnished stories.